Hey guys, welcome to New Song Church Online. So glad you're here. My name's Taylor. I'm the lead pastor if I haven't met you. A couple of quick things before we jump into the message today. Number one, I want to encourage you to start a house church gathering. So as restrictions continue to lift, we're coming out of this moment of just intense isolation. And so I want to encourage you to have some people over to your house starting next Sunday. And all you got to do is just stream this service in your home, invite some family members, some coworkers, some neighbors, some friends that you have, people that don't know Jesus even, watch the service together. And just have a barbecue, hang out. So community is really important. We really want to encourage you to take advantage of that starting next Sunday. Number two, the message this morning is going to be a little intense, okay? So I just want to forewarn you, if you are in the habit of watching these services with your kids, this might be one that you might want to put them off in a different room, to go play with their Barbie dolls or something, okay? Because we're going to get into some real stuff here today. We're getting into some real stuff in the Sermon on the Mount. We're going to be talking about sex. We're going to be talking about pornography. We're going to be talking about marriage and how all of these things interact with each other, our sex-saturated culture, how we operate as Jesus followers in this moment, the damage of all of that on us as individuals, as families, and as society as a whole. So we're getting into some really deep waters here today together. I'm stoked about it. I hope you are too. Grab a Bible if you got one and jump with me to Matthew chapter 5. We're eventually going to be in verses 27 through 30, but I want to do a little bit more work on context here because I think this is really important. Last week and this week and really a couple weeks to come, we are in this moment in the Sermon on the Mount where we are realizing that, you know what, Jesus really understands the human condition. Like he really gets human nature. And that's really good news for you and I because of what he wants to do about it. But it's also really bad news because of what he has to say about the human condition, that we're actually way worse than we think we are, right? And a lot of people have this view of Jesus, that he was a good teacher, if you even really believe that he existed. And maybe you're here, you're asking spiritual questions, you're a skeptic. I'm so glad that you're here with us. Thanks for hanging out with us. And maybe that's your view of Jesus, that he was a good teacher. His message to humanity was, you know what? You guys are doing pretty good. Like you guys are doing okay. You're doing good stuff. You're, he just reinforced, this whole love your neighbor thing. And that's what eventually got him killed. A lot of people have this view that was Jesus. That's the historical Jesus. That was his message. But the reality is that couldn't be further from the truth. Do you know what got Jesus killed? It's stuff like what he said in Matthew chapter 5, verse 20. Look at this with me. He says, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. So here's the deal. That's bad news bears for you, man. Okay, so the scribes and the Pharisees, those guys were hyper focused on law observance. They were all about the commandments. They were all about the rules. They were all about doing what God commanded them to do perfectly to essentially earn their own salvation. And that's what they live for, man. And these guys, Jesus is saying, they don't even make the cut. And if that's true of them, you're screwed, man. Like there's no hope for us. Okay, so here's the deal. Let me illustrate for you this way. The scribes and the Pharisees, you guys remember kickball in 5th grade? They're the kid that's like a foot taller than everybody else, that's super athletic, and that always gets picked first. You know who you are? You are, in context of what Jesus is talking about here, you're the awkward kid that doesn't have an athletic bone in his body that always gets picked last because you're the reason why your team always loses. That's you, right? That's what Jesus is saying. These guys don't even make the cut, which means that you're really toast. There's absolutely no hope for you. And that's what Jesus is saying. That's you and that's me. And literally, the message of Jesus is this: you are a disaster. Like you are a total, complete disaster. Your life is messed up, and your righteousness, it actually needs to exceed beyond the most religiously devoted people that have ever existed if you want to earn heaven. That's what Jesus is talking about here. And the only way, Jesus' point in Matthew chapter 5, verse 20, this is what I'm trying to say, is he's not saying, so try harder. He's not saying that it's about doing certain things and not doing certain things. What Jesus is, the message of Matthew chapter 5, verse 20, the verse I just read to you, is listen, I am the only way. I'm the only way. The only way you get saved, the only way that you get eternal life, the only way that you get heaven and a greater righteousness is if I actually hop up on a cross, die in your place, take your sin from you, pay the penalty from it for it, raised from death 3 days later. So you by faith in me now you don't go to the grave, you go through the grave into everlasting life. The only way you get this righteousness I'm talking about is if I give you mine as a gift. That's what Jesus is saying. You need an alien righteousness. You cannot save yourself. And this is really important, really offensive and important, because we live in a day and an age that's all about self-actualization, right? Like it's all about human potential, that we as humans, we are intrinsically good. We are wonderful people, the majority of us, and give us enough time and we're going to figure out all of our problems. We'll be able to save ourselves. It's all about human potential. It's all about all that. That's the day and age that we live in. But here's the problem, man, is we look at that and we say that's a pretty new 21st century thing. But it's been along for a very long time. And historically, within Christianity, what we call it is salvation by works. And here's the problem, is that is a tremendous amount of pressure to put on yourself. Because you look in your heart and you see the same thing that everybody else does. You see that you're a messed up, broken person like everybody else sucking air on planet Earth right now. You see greed, you see lust, you see anger, you see just very self-centered, selfish desire. You're racked with it. You see pride. This is what you see. And no amount of self-actualization seems to actually help that. It doesn't make it go away. And in fact, it just gets worse. That's the problem. That's why this is too much pressure to put on yourself. You might be listening to me and you're like, I don't think I'm that bad. Listen, go ask your spouse if what I'm saying is true. I'm sure they would love to enlighten you that I am telling you the truth right now. But this is the first movement of the gospel, right? It cuts you. It actually condemns you. Jesus is like, listen, your depravity runs way deeper than you thought. You can't save yourself. But there's a second movement of the gospel that comes at the same time where Jesus says, you can't save yourself, but I can. And in fact, I actually want to. And so last week, Pastor Ty talked about this issue of anger, right? And we found out that Ty has anger issues, which for those of you who know Ty, that's not that surprising of a thing. But okay, I'm just kidding. But so do you, right? And so do I, that we all have issues with anger. Jesus shows up and he says, listen, anger is actually the new murder. The scribes and Pharisees are saying, listen, you want to obey the commandment of God, just don't kill somebody. And Jesus is like, your righteousness has to exceed that. Like it's bad enough that you've actually wanted to. Right? It's bad enough that you've actually wanted to kill somebody. The anger is the new murder. Your righteousness needs to go beyond what the scribes and the Pharisees are actually talking to you about. And so today, we're talking about the reality of lust. Again, this is something that every single human being experiences. For some of you, how lust plays out in your life is going to be in the context of sexual desire. It's going to play out in the context of pornography, whatever it is for you. For some of you, you lust after a bigger, better lifestyle. You lust after a wealth accumulation of power, of whatever it is, of beauty. This is how lust plays out in your life. But the reality is we all struggle with it, okay? So, and we live in a sex-saturated culture. I don't need to exegete that. I don't need to explain that. It's true. Go hop on your phone and scroll through Instagram for 2 seconds. What do you see? It's literally boobs, man, all over. Some of you are like, did he just say boobs from the, what? Yes, I did. It's true because it's real, man. Like it's everywhere. Turn on your TV. It's literally everywhere. You are being preached at by culture. Sex is the ultimate way of life. Culture is selling you sex all of the time. And so the question is, when it comes, how are you actually going to deal with that temptation? Are you going to give into it? Or is there another way to be truly human in this area of sex and sexuality and temptation to lust, etc.? And so that's the question. And some of you, here's the thing. You're living a secret life. You're living in the dark in regard to an addiction to pornography. You're cheating on your spouse. What happens in the context of your mind in this area, it's very dark and it's disgusting. And some of you don't even think it's really a big deal. Like it's just kind of like, oh, it's just not that really big of a deal. But here's what Jesus is going to do today. He's going to say, no, this is a very big deal and you need to feel the weight of that. But the other thing I think Jesus wants to do today is I really believe that there is healing for some of you, that there is supernatural deliverance and healing in Jesus. And he wants to get that to some of you today. So open yourself up to that. And I'm excited to see what God does through his word this morning. So Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5, verse 27, getting into our text for today, he says this, "You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery." So what Jesus is doing right there is, again, he's quoting from the Old Testament. He's quoting from Exodus chapter 20. And the verse says, "You shall not commit adultery." But here's the deal. What the scribes and Pharisees were saying was, listen, here, you don't want to break that commandment. Here's how you do it. Don't have sex with somebody that you're not actually married to. And so Jesus, what he does is he ups the ante again, right? And he says this in verse 28, "But I say to you," and this is where this gets really intense, "whoever looks at a woman with lustful intent," underline those two words, lustful intent, "has already committed adultery with her in his heart." Yikes. Okay. That's crazy. Jesus, he's upping the ante again. He's saying, listen, the scribes and the Pharisees are just saying, listen, you want to not commit adultery, just don't sleep with somebody you're not married to. And Jesus is like, listen, your righteousness has to exceed that. And I say to you, if you look at another woman with lustful intent, you've actually already committed adultery in your heart. That is crazy, man. You've actually committed adultery way before that physical act. The best way to illustrate what Jesus is after right here, man, I think, is it's the picture of an iceberg. Have you ever seen an iceberg? I'm sure you have, right? You've got the top of the iceberg above the water is 10% of the iceberg, right? But the reality is below the surface of the water, what you can't see is the 90% of the iceberg that's actually under the surface of the water. And this is what Jesus is saying. Listen, you see the 10% above the water of the act of adultery. I'm interested in the 90% of the iceberg underneath the surface of the water that you can't see, that's going on in the human heart. Because adultery comes from someplace, man. And it comes from a sick and a depraved heart. And Jesus is like, that's what I want to get at here. That's where I want to bring healing. I'm not interested in just the surface level, these, behavior modifications. And yes, behavior is important, but I want to get at where this bad behavior has come from. I want to get at the brokenness of the human heart and what you're really you're trying to satisfy yourself in these areas. I want to satisfy that spot in your heart and bring fundamental, deep, and lasting change and healing. That's what Jesus is saying here. What's going on in the heart level, Jesus says, is just as important to me and actually condemns you before God just as much as the physical act of adultery. Now, that's where the weight of this passage comes in and that you have to understand. That's what Jesus is saying. Listen to verse 29. Here's the weight. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. Whoa! Oh man, it just keeps getting better. Okay, for it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. Where's fluffy Jesus, right? Like, where's Psalm 23? The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want green pastures and still waters. What is this? Like this, now he's connecting lust in hell. That's intense. Jesus, that's why this is ridiculous. One of the greatest critiques of culture on behalf of Christianity is actually the ethic that they think Christianity holds regarding sex, which is actually totally inaccurate. An accurate picture of what the Bible actually teaches. Listen, God is the most pro-sex being in the entire universe. But Jesus, why he's connecting lust here and hell is he's saying, listen, you are so messed up. You have no idea how evil this actually is. What's going on in the context of the human heart regarding lustful intent and desire is so beyond the innocence that you think it is. And that's what I want to get at. That's what Jesus is saying. You can't even see how evil it is because you're that messed up. What is lustful intent? Let's talk about this for a second. What are you doing when you're engaging in that? Listen, man, you are objectifying another human being. You're literally dehumanizing them. You are making them an object. You're removing them from a place that says you are a human being worthy of dignity and respect and honor. You are pushing them down to the level of an object that says you are now the means by which I experience satisfaction and you're my means to selfish gain. That's what you're saying. You're objectifying this person and it's evil, man. And Jesus says it's dehumanizing and it's wrong. And that's the reality of what's going on in the context of your heart. You're making an object out of another human. And that word for hell is actually really interesting in verse 29. In the Greek, it's Gehenna. And Gehenna was a place outside of the city of Jerusalem. literally on the back, just right outside the walls of Jerusalem, where the people would actually take their garbage and they would dump it back there and they would light it on fire, right? It's just a horrible place, miserable place. Nobody was hanging out there. And Jesus is like, listen, this is where that leads. This is where if you play it all the way out, this is where this goes. And so there's an eternal implication here that Jesus is getting at, that he has in mind when he says this. But it also has to do with your life now. And what Jesus is saying is, listen, this is how you burn your life to the ground. This is how you burn your family to the ground. This is how you burn society to the ground. Right here, it's this evil that we're talking about right now. And, in fact, psychologists are finally starting to catch up to what Jesus is after right here. And they say this, that porn has the same effect on your brain as heroin, as drugs. And so what happens if you've ever spent time with a drug addict is they take drugs and the brain builds up a tolerance to that drug. So over the course of time, they end up having to take more of that drug, whatever it is. They're chasing that original high, but they can't get it because their brains are so messed up. And this is what psychologists tell us the thing with porn is that it works the same way. And so what happens is when you get people that are addicted to pornography, what happens is as it spans over the course of a couple decades, you have to keep getting into more and more hardcore stuff to chase that original high. And a lot of times what happens is it leads to physical violence, right? And so we got men that are now abusing their wives or their partners because their brains are so jacked up, man. That's where this heads. This is what happens in the context of a multi-decade pornography addiction. It can happen sooner than that though. And it's not okay. It's abuse. On a societal level, I don't know if you have ever heard somebody say, porn is harmless. It doesn't really do any damage. It's just, me in a bedroom doing my thing. It's not that big of a deal, right? It's harmless. It doesn't hurt anybody. They're full of it, man. That literally is not a thing. Porn, you know what it does? You can find this information on websites like Fight the New Drug and encourage you to check it out. It actually perpetuates the sex trafficking industry. Why? Because demand for sex trafficking goes up as porn becomes more of a thing. But also there's an even crazier connection here where what happens in the porn industry actually becomes a kind of training manual for sex traders and people who are involved in that industry, if you can call it that. It's demonic and it's horrible and it's not okay. And I found this one writer was talking about this and he says, porn directly informs what happens to trafficking victims. Their captors and sex buyers get ideas from watching porn, which is often violent, and force victims to recreate acts they see performed in it. Come on, man. Not harmless. Lust is not something that just happens in the vacuum of your own mind that doesn't affect anything or anyone else, but it literally has power to do incredible damage. There is hell to pay. That's what Jesus is saying. This is how you burn society to the ground. Right here, you end up in the garbage dump. That's what Jesus is getting at here. And so let's talk about some stats for a second, okay? Because this is very sobering and very real. And I got these stats from Covenant Eyes. You can check it out, another great website. In the context of marriage, they say this: 56% of divorces involved one party having an obsessive interest in pornographic websites. Over half of divorces involved porn, an obsessive interest in it. 70% of wives of sex addicts could be diagnosed with PTSD. Why? It's because often they end up being forced to do things that they're not comfortable with, and the husband actually becomes physically violent. This is happening right now. And if this is you, because statistically speaking, there are some of you that are watching this where this is your context, what I want to say to you is you are involved in an abusive relationship. Please reach out. Reach out to us here. We would love to help you because it's not okay. This is not God's plan for your life to exist in that environment, and we want to help. Prolonged exposure to pornography leads to diminished trust between intimate couples, which obviously that's a big deal because healthy relationships they're built on trust. Prolonged exposure to pornography leads to belief that promiscuity is the natural state and a lack of attraction to family and child raising. And so listen, man, if you don't see how this burns society to the ground, I really don't know what to tell you. We've got an increase in divorce. We've got women walking around with PTSD because of what they've experienced by their husband or their sexual partners. We've got men losing interest in investing in their family and raising their children. And so they fly off the rails and act like kids. And so their kids go insane and fly off the rails and get into all this sort of stuff because dad's not around. He's not helping raise them. Because dad's not, literally the family breaks down the entire society. Like if you don't get that, man, I don't know what to say to you. This stuff isn't just like isolated in your own head. This is massive, the implications of what Jesus is getting at here. Obviously, though, married people aren't the only ones that struggle with porn. So let's talk about teens for a second. 90% of teens and 96% of young adults are either encouraging, accepting, or neutral when they talk about porn with their friends. That is terrifying. That means only 4% of teenagers and young people are opposed to porn, that recognize the negative effects of it and are willing to speak out about it. 90 to 96%, man, either encouraging, accepting, or neutral when they talk about porn with their friends. That's crazy. Nearly 27% of teens receive sex. That's such a hard word for me to say. For those of you that are a little behind the times, what that is young people sending naked pictures to each other. It's totally culturally normal and accepted and okay. That's just what happens. Around 15% of teenagers are actually sending them. That's again a staggering, massive number. 57% of teens search out porn at least monthly. Over half, almost 60%. The first exposure to pornography among men is 12 years old on average. I was 12, so that holds true with my experience. Listen to this, 71% of teens hide online behavior from their parents. And so for those of you who are raising teenagers right now, and you think that your teenager is this perfect little angel that's never exposed to any of this stuff, listen, statistically, you're wrong. Just because they came up to you and they said, listen, mommy, daddy, I've never done any of that stuff. That's not my thing. Listen, that's what I said, right? That's what everybody said. Statistically speaking, they are exposed to this stuff, whether they're seeking it out or not. They're around this with their friends, and you need to have the hard, awkward conversations, because the reality is as much as you want them to live in this little protected bubble, they're not. They're exposed to it, and that's the reality, and we got to take a responsibility here and step in and bring some awkward conversation to the table, because it's really important, and they got to understand the damage here of what this is going to do to them long term. Let's talk about the church for a second. 1 in 6 pastors in the United States look at porn on a regular basis. You know what? This is everywhere. 64% of Christian men and 15% of Christian women say they watch porn at least once a month. Massive numbers, man. This is very real in the lives of many of you that are watching this. And Jesus is like, this is a big deal. This is a really big deal. And it's interesting, the interesting about this to me is I don't know if you noticed this, but Jesus went particularly after the men here, right? He commits adultery in his heart, who's lusting after a woman, right? So he goes specifically after the men. This is not just a man thing though, right? Because 33% of women across the board watch porn on a weekly basis, and 75% say they watch it in the last 6 months. So this isn't just a man thing, but Jesus knows the human condition well enough to say, you know what? He goes right after the men. Not that women don't have any problems. You've got lots of problems, but here's the deal. If we got to pick one gender that's going to struggle more in this area, we know what the obvious choice is. And why is that, right? Because God has created man to be visual, right? There's that old saying that goes that women operate emotionally and verbally in the world. They live verbally and emotionally. Men operate visually. It's all about the eye for men. And in the creation account, even if you go back to Genesis 1 and 2, woman is literally the pinnacle of all creation. Ladies, can I get an amen? That's awesome. Literally, if you read the creation account, it's coming to this climactic moment where God says in the context of all of creation, it is not good for man to be alone. And he creates Eve. He literally puts Eve naked in front of Adam. What's going through Adam's mind in that moment, by the way? Right? Think about it. Like, he's not like, oh, would you look at that pretty little bird that I've never seen before? Oh, This is great. No, what's Adam thinking? He's literally like, I am ready to make some babies right now. Nothing else matters, man. He's like, Eve, you and me, we got the bushes over there. I'll get the wine, the Marvin Gaye going, and we're going to have a great time. That's what Adam is thinking. Why? Because we are visual creatures. And here's the thing, and this is why I want to talk about this, because the longer I'm in ministry and the more people that I talk to, it's amazing to me. A lot of times women, you just don't actually get this. So for example, I heard this story recently of a guy who went to a men's retreat, and they were talking about all of this stuff and porn and sexual temptation and addiction and all that and purity. And his buddy had a book called Every Man's Battle, which is a super popular book, great book. Get it, read it if you struggle with this and this is real for you. And so he's like, hey man, can I borrow that book? I struggle with this stuff too. I want to hear what he's got to say. So he grabs the book, he takes it home, and he made the mistake of leaving it on his nightstand, right? So he's reading the book, he puts it down on the nightstand, goes to work the next day. So the wife sees it and she picks it up and she's like, what's this? She starts skimming through it. And of course, in the introduction of the book, there's a story of this guy driving in his car on a hot summer's day. And he looks over and there's this woman jogging, right? With super tight clothes, everything's like moving everywhere. And so what's he doing? He's staring. He forgot he's driving a car and he actually crashes his car. And so, the wife is reading this. She's like, I cannot believe this. So the guy comes home from work and he walks in the front door and he sees his wife in the hallway holding the book. And he's like, uh-oh, this isn't good. And she looks at him and she's like, is this your book? And he's like, no, it's my buddy's book. I borrowed it from him. And she's like, why do you have it? Like, does he think this way? And he's like, yeah, he thinks this way. This is real for him. And that's why I have it, because I'm trying to understand all this sort of stuff. And she looks at him and she's like this. Here's the deal. He's a pervert. I cannot believe he thinks this way. I cannot believe this is real. And if he thinks that way, he thinks that way about me. And you know what? We are never hanging out with him and his wife again because they're disgusting, horrible people. I can't even believe this. And she looks at her husband and she says, do you think this way? You don't think this way, do you? What does he say? No, of course not, honey. I don't think that. Why is he saying that? It's because he knows he's busted, man. He knows he's in the doghouse if he says yes. But you know what the deal is with that guy? He's a liar. Right? Just literally like every man who has said the exact same thing. You're a liar. You're not telling the truth. This is how God has us wired, and we have to get this. And I'm saying this so hopefully that gives you a little sympathy for each other so you can understand this is how God is wired. And there's an important distinction here, right? Because there's nothing wrong with finding someone beautiful, right? God has wired us to respond to beauty. There's nothing wrong with that. It's when the movie reel starts playing in your head and you start undressing that person, that's when Jesus draws the line and says, okay, now we need to talk about this. That's what's going on. And in fact, sexual desire isn't even an evil thing. Again, that's something that God hardwired into humanity. It's a good thing. It's not evil in and of itself. In fact, here's the deal. A part of the Christian answer to what Jesus is talking about here is this. For married people, you want to know how you rise above culture in this area of temptation, of lustful intent, of all of this that we're talking about. You want to know part of the Christian answer here. In fact, one of the main answers I really think that Christianity offers is married people have a great sex life. That's it. That's one of the big things. And men, guys get so much more excited about, yeah, I loved this church, right? That's true. Like, have a really great sex life in your marriage. That's how you rise above culture in this area. And in fact, Paul gets at this in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Let me read a couple verses for you here in verses 2 for 5. This is what Paul says. But because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights and likewise the wife to her husband. He's talking about sex right there. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Generally, the men get a little bit more excited about that verse than the women do. Do not deprive one another. Verse 5, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time that you may devote yourselves to prayer, but then come together again so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. You know what Paul is saying? Listen, there's a lot of ways to wreck your marriage. There's a lot of ways for Satan to get in there and screw stuff up. You want to know one? Don't have sex. Deprive each other. That's literally what he's saying. He's saying, dude, don't do that. What's interesting to me is every couple pretty much that I've ever worked with that's having issues in their marriage, you know the one thing that every one of them has in common? They're not sleeping together. They're not having sex. And Paul's like, dude, don't do that. Like, this is why you're literally opening the door for the enemy to get in here and bring division. What does it do? It opens the door for Satan to walk in. You get higher cases of porn addiction, of adultery, of all of this sort of stuff. And listen, that's not an excuse, right? Like, ladies, I'm not saying to let your guy off the hook for this. There's no excuse for it. God holds us to an incredibly high standard, but you got to understand what actually goes on in the mind of a man in the context of all of this stuff. Paul says it opens the door to temptation. Now, there's a couple nuances with this issue that I think are important to talk about pastorally, because the question is, why do couples get into that position? Why do they get into that spot? In extreme cases, it's because of physical violence. And if that's you and why you're not having sex with your spouse, you're not in the wrong. Please, again, you're in an abusive relationship, reach out. We would love to help you. But 98% of the time, you know what I've seen? That it sounds, as I talk to other people in ministry, counselors, it seems to be the same thing. It's not violence. What I've seen is the reason why is because the husband isn't actually doing his job to lay his life down for his wife. Super simple, right? Listen, man, this is your responsibility. This is our responsibility as husbands, is to lay our lives down for our wives. God has assigned us as head of our household. That means that we take the lead in self-giving, self-sacrifice, servant love, cross-bearing. I mean, Jesus, dude, Paul in Ephesians, what does he say to the men? He says, listen, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and laid his life down for her. In other words, what Paul is saying is, listen, you want to know what it looks like to be a godly husband? Look at the cross. Look at what Jesus did for you. He literally sacrificed himself on your behalf, right? He takes out all of the excuses that we want to give, right? Well, she's not doing what she's supposed to do. Well, she's just not having sex with me. Well, she's not meeting my emotions. She's not doing, it's a complete disaster. She never cleans the house, never does the laundry, whatever it is. Jesus is like, listen, none of that matters. You do your job. And here's the thing, man, when you do, as the man and the husband, when you live that out, it's amazing how many issues in your marriage get ironed out, including your sex life. It's so true. But oftentimes within that dynamic, what can happen is the wife, what she does is she can use sex as a tool for manipulation and control and withhold it to get back at her husband, which, listen, that is equally wrong and not okay, and Jesus isn't okay with it. Marissa and I, when we first got married, actually, this is one of the things that we got an agreement about, that we were never actually going to use sex to get back at each other. And that's really important, because this is a massive area, man, where you can end up blowing your marriage up. So super important. Literally, if you want to have a great marriage, maybe you could be on literally the brink of divorce right now, right? Everything's bad. They say two things are going to come out of COVID is babies and divorces, right? So you might be in that spot where you guys are literally about to get divorced. You want to know how to fix all of your issues? Literally every issue in your marriage, every confrontation, every problem that you guys have, I will give you one word to fix all of that. And I promise you, if you do this thing, 100% of your issues will go away this week. It's very simple, man. God's plan for this is very simple. It's just really hard and uncomfortable, and we don't like it. I should be charging you money for this, by the way. You want to know what it is? How to make all your marriage problems go away? How to have an incredible marriage? How to flourish in the context of your marriage? Here's what it is. Die. But literally, die, like kill your flesh. Kill that thing on the inside of you that says, you know what? This marriage is all about me. Like it's all about getting this person to orbit around my life, to be all about me, to serve me. It's about my needs, about them beating my needs. Kill that thing and literally lay your life down for that other person. And that you will meet, all of your issues are gone. They're completely taken care of. Again, super simple, super easy. This is the way of Jesus, but super difficult. And we wonder why we've got all of these problems, man, because we're just super selfish. Jesus is like, listen, you got to take care of each other, man. Keep the tempter away. This is how you flourish in your marriage. So Jesus is after the person who's got the issue with lust, but he's also after the person, I think by implication, that's intentionally drawing the look. And, just to get at this again, because this is so important, man, what some of you are posting on social media is just insane. It's just like, here's me and my 4.5 inches of fabric by the pool, looking great, flexing on it. Like, what do you do? Dude, you're perpetuating evil. And Jesus, in fact, in Matthew chapter 18, you know what he says? He says, woe to the one through whom temptation comes. He's like, if you are leading other people into sin, like woe to you, like you're going to give an account on behalf of that. And I'm not saying go to the store and pick up neck to floor denim and wear it all the time, right? That's not attractive. Nobody wants to see that. Don't be that person. But there's a difference between trying to be attractive, which is nothing necessarily wrong with that, and being intentionally seductive, as I heard one pastor talk about raising. Big difference. And what Jesus is saying in Matthew 18 is, listen, you're going to stand before God and you're going to give an account on behalf of what happened in your heart in that moment. So that's another thing Jesus is getting at here in this text. So how are we going to deal with it, right? Let's bring this in for a landing. How are we going to deal with it? What's the answer? Is there any hope for us in this moment? Look at what Jesus says in verse 29 through 30. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it's better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away, for it's better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell. What's Jesus' point? What's his point? How do you kill porn? How do you kill sex addiction? How do you kill that fantasy reel in your head that you can't get a hold of? Violence. You've got to get violent with it. Pluck out your eye, cut off your arm. Jesus is absolutely causing you to violence against sin. Listen, man, there has to be a place in my answer here that says you have to do whatever lies within your power to do. You have to get violent. You got to take it seriously. You got to recognize, like, this is a big deal. What's going on here? Some of you just act like it's not a real thing. Listen, you're going to stand before God one day and give an account on behalf of this stuff, man. This is a big deal. You got to get violent. Stop acting like it's not a thing. If you have an issue with pornography, there's a program called Open DNS that I would encourage you to get literally right now. And what it does is it's a firewall for all of your devices, and it protects you from being able to get into stuff. Also, if you have an Android, literally throw it in the garbage, because Android sucks, number one. An iPhone is way cooler. Get an Apple, get an iPhone, because it's way easier to lock down. There's way more protections on it. So do that. Get violent with it, man. Tell somebody about what you're struggling with. Call a pastor, talk to me. Listen, this is real for me. I had a 7-year addiction to pornography that Jesus set me free from. I want to see that for you. Call me, talk to me. Let's chat. Let's talk about how to get you free. Get an accountability partner. Call somebody when you're getting tempted. Man, a lot of times that call is just the thing that you need to break out of that temptation. Get violent. That's the point. Here's the thing, though, is that's not a complete answer. Because if you take what Jesus is saying in context, those boundaries, do it. They're good. They're important. There's a place for it, but it's only going to work in the short term, and they actually don't change your heart, which is what Jesus is after here. I'll tell you guys a story. This is literally the craziest thing I've ever experienced in my entire life. I've told you guys this before. If you're squeamish, maybe don't plug your ears or something, because this is crazy. So I was a fireman for 6 years, and when I was getting my EMT certification, I had to go do some rotations through the emergency room. And so maybe you guys remember this. Several years ago, there was a guy that he legitimately in Bellingham. I don't know why I'm laughing. This is brutal. He builds a guillotine and he cuts off his arm. So I'm in the emergency room, and we start, like the guy comes over the intercom and he's like, "Hey guys, so we've got this is going on. This guy's coming in. Get ready." And so I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, is this actually happening right now? So they bring the guy in the ambulance, and all of a sudden he's in the emergency room, and all of these nurses and doctors start jumping on the guy, trying to pin his arm down, and it's just blood everywhere, nasty craziness. And he's literally, this guy that just cut off his arm is literally shouting this verse at the top of his lungs. I kid you not, you cannot make up the script for this stuff, man. He's like, if your right arm causes you to sin, cut it off, saith the Lord. That's what he's saying. And so they finally get him sedated. They get him into the room that I'm in, and I'm standing over the guy, and my job is so I'm literally breathing for the guy. I'm bagging the guy. I'm standing over there, and he's totally just knocked out, and they've got his arm wrapped up, and I'm looking at this dude, and I'm looking at his arm, and I'm like, dude, what an idiot. Did you just do that? Why? Because you can cut off your arm and it doesn't actually change your heart. You can pluck out your eye and still lust. You can cut off your arm and still have an issue with this, man. Jesus, he's trying to shock you, to say, listen, I need to go deeper than this. I'm after transformation of the heart. You actually need heart change. This is Jesus, what he wants to do in your life, man. And this is the power of the gospel. It doesn't change what you do. It changes what you want to do. Listen, man, Christianity is not about behavior modification. It's about heart transformation. And then what happens is a byproduct of your heart being transformed by Jesus is your lifestyle changes. That's how this works. It was never meant to be about you trying hard and doing better. That's the point. I was talking with a guy this last week, and I get questions like this often. And basically he said, if I still fight with this addiction, my addiction, until the day I die, am I going to hell? Like, I've given my life to Jesus and I just cannot seem to beat this thing. And if I cannot beat it, until my dying breath, am I even actually saved? That's what he was asking me. And I get questions like this all the time. But this is how we think, man. We think I have to beat porn. I have to beat addiction in my life. So we put all this pressure on ourselves. All the pressure's on me. I have to figure this out or else the hammer is going to drop on my life. That's how we think. But listen, man, the whole point of the cross is that your problems were too beyond anything that you could do to fix them. God had to fix them for you. This whole sin separation from God thing, it was too much for you to be able to handle. Jesus had to handle it for you. He had to deal with it. If you can't be good enough, can't do enough good things, you can't eliminate enough bad things from your life, that's the point. Just because you give your life to Jesus and you get saved, it doesn't mean that changes. What I mean by that is a lot of people end up trusting Jesus for their salvation. Like, okay, I believe that, ultimately Jesus is going to save me, but you don't actually trust Jesus for your sanctification. Meaning this whole holiness thing, this whole life change thing, this is actually my responsibility. Like, I'm the one that actually has to change my heart. That's what we do. But it works the same, man. It's the exact same thing. And I want to free you up from that right now, because that is why your Christian experience is a complete disaster and why you're frustrated, because you don't get this. Listen, sin is too strong for you. And the ironic thing is, the harder that you work at it, the worse it gets. Because what happens is you screw up and then you feel shame, you feel guilt, you feel condemned because you know that you're supposed to live different, you know you're supposed to be better, but here you are screwing up again. And so what happens is you just feel like trash, you feel like garbage. You're like, well, you know what? I already feel like this, so I might as well just keep giving into this temptation and doing my thing because I'm already miserable. I've already screwed up. And so what happens is the sin cycle just continues. And this is why Jesus' grace, man, is the only thing that can break that cycle in your life, is because what Jesus' blood does is it comes and it speaks a better word over you. And it says, even when you mess up, man, even when you screw up, you are righteous, you are holy, you are blameless, you are loved by God. Your identity as child of God isn't in jeopardy because the cross was such a thorough work on your behalf. Jesus didn't just die for the sins of your past before you got saved. He died for sins of your past, your present, and your future. Your entire life, man, if you've given your life to Jesus, it's covered. There's no more guilt, shame, condemnation for you. You're free, right? And what happened? This is how a life changes, because that goes from, and some of you, and here's the problem, some of you get that intellectually. You're like, yeah, but that hasn't hit your heart. And it's got to hit your heart, man. Because that's when everything changes. When you recognize, categorically speaking, you are a saint. Like, if you've given your life to Jesus, you're not a sinner anymore. That's not your identity. It doesn't mean that you're never going to sin. It just means that when you do, the hammer isn't going to drop on you because it already dropped on Jesus. He already took the penalty. That's awesome. Dude, that changes everything. And if you're understanding what I'm saying, the natural question that should come up as well, if that's true, then I should just go ahead and do whatever I want because there's no penalty. Like, I should just be able to give it. And you're missing the point, because this is how Jesus changes what you want to do, man. Because when you recognize, wow, I'm that secure in Jesus, like, I'm that secure that it's not about what I've done, but on behalf of what he's done for me, that I can't actually lose my salvation, that he's not changing his mind about me, then the pressure's off of you. The pressure's off because you recognize it was never about your performance for God, but his performance for you. And then the love and the desire that you have for porn, for drugs, for whatever it is, it just begins to break. The cycle breaks. And this is my story, man. I had an addiction to pornography for 7 years. Tried everything, could not get free from it. But this is why it's not hard for me to not look at porn anymore, man. I don't wake up every single day of my life and say, oh, I got to try really hard to not look at porn right now. Like I got to grit my teeth and try really hard to not end up on a porn site and screw up my marriage and my entire life and my church and everybody, right? I don't do that. Why? Thomas Chalmers, here's an amazing quote. He says, the only way to break the grip of a beautiful object on the soul is to show it an object even more beautiful. Do you know what that more beautiful object is? It's Jesus. That's what broke the grip of porn off my life. That's what changed everything for me. It's when I realize that he's this good, that's when your heart can change because the pressure's off. And you can recognize, in the words of Tim Keller, even though you are more sinful and flawed than you ever dared imagine you are more accepted and loved in Jesus than you ever dared dream. Let's pray. God, I thank you for your mercy. I thank you, Jesus, that you understand our disposition. You understand our plight. You understand our human condition even better than we do. And Lord, I pray in this most important area of our lives that you would bring true, deep transformation and healing. I pray, Jesus, that Holy Spirit, that you would come and show us that what we are really looking for in these areas really is, we're only ever going to find it in Jesus. I pray for every marriage, God, for just holiness and purity, the power of God to get out of self-obsession and just the demand for this other person to exist for me and my needs. God, I pray that we would, in the context of our marriages, look like you for the world around us. In Jesus' name, Lord, I thank you for change. I thank you for healing. I thank you for mercy and forgiveness. I pray for the person that has been existing in this place of condemnation, of I have to measure up to God's standard or else the hammer will drop on me. I thank you that they get set free from that right now as they are met with the grace and the love of Jesus in this moment, and they surrender every area of their life to you in Jesus' name. Amen.